Patterson Foundation
strengthens people, organizations, and communities by focusing on issues that address mutual aspirations,
foster wide participation, and encourage learning and sharing.
All right, welcome, Susie Bowie.
Thanks for having me. I'm super excited to be here with you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so welcome to the podcast series From Both Sides of the Check, where we explore what it's like to participate in the philanthropic sector from both the funder and the nonprofit side, and really help show us a path forward to working together as teammates to make impact.
I love it. I'm so excited to be here with you.
Awesome. Well, we'll start. Just tell me a little bit about yourself, Susie. What's your current role? And just, tell me a little bit about that role, what you do, and what do you do, and how is success measured?
Yeah. So my name is Susie Bowie. I'm the current president and CEO of the William G. and Marie Selby Foundation. Our foundation is based in Sarasota, but we serve Sarasota, Manatee, Charlotte, and DeSoto counties. And the foundation was really started back in 1955. Bill Selby set the foundation up. He passed away the year after in 1956. And his wife, Marie, continued to serve on the board till 1971 when she passed away. The foundation was really set up to provide greater opportunity for people in our area. So about a third of our funds support students with scholarships, high impact scholarships for all 4 years of college. And the other 2/3 of our funds support nonprofits in our four-county area with capital projects. So there's a couple ways we look at our success. One is we really want all of our students to not only go to college, but graduate from college, right? We want them to be successful, have jobs in their field. We want them to be connected with mentors so that they can explore what it looks like to work in their chosen field, before they graduate, and hopefully get those great connections for the future when they graduate and either go on to even higher education or get a job. And with the nonprofits we serve, we want them to have the strength to be able to make the gains for the people that they serve. And they do that through vehicles or buildings or technology, all the things that we can support them with so that their staff and their volunteers can be effective.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for the work that you do. So this podcast is really diving into what it's like to work in the philanthropic sector.
Yeah.
So in your current role as president and CEO, what's your favorite part of your job?
So there's a lot of favorite parts I have of my job. I would say the best part for me is getting to learn every day. I have been in the philanthropic field now for 18 years, and there's not a day on the job when I don't learn something new, either something about our community or a different approach to the work, or something about a nonprofit organization. Maybe I thought I knew everything that they accomplished in their work, but I learned something new about the people that they serve or the way that they approach the work. And it's that learning that's really exciting to me. It's also daunting, right? Because it means that I can never totally master what it means to live in a community. There's always new things happening. The environment is always changing. And so that means there are new adaptations we have to make to do the work effectively and to really understand the people who we're ultimately serving with both the grants and the scholarships. So that's probably my favorite part of the work. It enables me to be a lifelong learner.
How do you ensure that you're learning? What do you do to make that happen?
That's a great question. So I love to listen to podcasts like this so that I can learn from other people. I love reading. There's a lot of great things out there to read. Making sure that I stay on top of what's really happening in the community. So reports that are published locally, really talking to people one-on-one through the observations that they have with their work. Often it's people that are working most closely in the community that can help me learn. So finding out not just from other CEOs in the field, but talking with programmatic people that actually have the opportunity to serve those in our community. What are they seeing on a day-to-day basis? How are they interacting? What is new from one day to the next? It's also really helpful to make sure that I'm learning about trends around the nation. So whether it's reading the news or reading the headlines on X and then following up by clicking through, those things are important. The Chronicle of Philanthropy, Chronicle of Higher Education, those are great sources for learning as well.
So no job is perfect, or if it is, let me know.
Yeah.
I'm curious, in your current role, what's your least favorite part?
Yeah, so I'd say the least favorite part of my role right now, it's probably changed over time. Right now, it is looking at the vast field of things that philanthropy is expected to support and thinking about why in the world should private dollars why should those dollars be raised to support things that all people need and deserve in our country? So I've done a lot of thinking about that lately, whether it's healthcare, whether it's supporting children with summer hunger needs. We're having to raise money to support these things in this very wealthy country. And I believe in the power of philanthropy. I believe in what nonprofits can do and the power of foundations. But it's really a shame, and it's probably the least favorite part of my job when I think of how much money is having to be raised for things that people just deserve to have as Americans, as people who live in a very wealthy nation.
It's such a challenging thing to navigate. It's really understanding or coming up with an opinion of what is the purpose of the philanthropic sector, and particularly institutional philanthropy, and making that happen.
Absolutely. And locally, as we are starting to see governments, relinquish some of the investments that they've made for many, many years in important organizations, whether it's early learning, whether it's investing in, one-stop housing for people, whatever it is. It's really tough because I think there's an expectation that philanthropy will be able to come in and take right over. And there's a lot of philanthropic resources in our community, but there's not enough to solve the issues that really belong to all of us, So those are some of the parts about the work that maybe I like the least.
Yeah, and those are the deepest parts, right? It's like, it's almost existential for what it's like to operate and do work in the sector, and how to do the work as impactfully as possible.
Absolutely, because all of these are systemic issues. It requires all of us to think. It requires businesses, it requires government, it requires everyday citizens just to know what's going on in their communities around them so that they can be proactive in their voting, they're proactive as they interact with other people and understand what their wants and needs are, because we're all part of this ecosystem together. I think too often philanthropy is put off in a separate box, but we're really charged with bringing some of those different sectors together, and we need everyone's full participation to make it happen.
Absolutely. And I think the research shows, right, around thinking about the different sectors, what are the unique pros and cons or attributes or shortcomings of those sectors, right? Government is the biggest, right? So it has the most resources to be able to work to resource an issue and can compel people to do things. And on the other hand, you have philanthropy, right, that has this power to convene and maybe innovate and take risks that government might be too slow or too big to make happen right away, whereas market forces have other capabilities too. And so that's something I'm hearing you say is that really dialing into what is philanthropy specifically capable of making happen.
Absolutely. I was chatting with someone at the Salvation Army this morning, and they were saying, we are part of the solution here, but we don't own the solution. We are a part of this. We don't own the problem and we don't own the solution. We're all working together on it. So I think the more we can realize that, the more we can support each other in this work of just being citizens as the world gets more and more complicated around us.
Yeah. So one of the challenges I noticed in my experience in the sector is sometimes a disconnect between nonprofits and funders. Theoretically, we're all on the same team working to make the same impact, but sometimes there's misunderstanding about what it's like to work on one side or the other.
That's right.
So in your current role, what do you wish nonprofits knew about what your role is like?
That's a great question. So thinking way, way back before I became involved in the philanthropic space, I was a program director at Crowley Museum and Nature Center, which is a small nonprofit nature center located in the eastern part of Sarasota County. And, I remember that we got a grant from the Selby Foundation and what a big deal that was. But I also remember how scary it was. It was really scary to think about applying for the grant. It was scary to think what would happen if we didn't get the grant. And I really wish that nonprofits understood that if they don't receive a grant, a lot of times it's because there are many other competing interests out there. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with the organization or what it's proposed. And not to take it personally, because there are usually twice at least the number of proposals as foundations are able to award funds, right? So there's that piece. But there's also a lot of work and time that goes into analyzing proposals. There's a lot that goes into the work of a foundation outside of just the grant making piece. People are working at foundations trying to get to know what's happening in their larger community, how to bring people together, as you mentioned, for convenings, how to make sure that all different sides of an issue are talking to each other and working to solve some of the big things happening, not just solving problems, but what are our aspirations for the future? What are the positive things that we would like to see? So there's a lot more to a foundation other than just awarding grants. And if you're only looking for that piece of what a foundation can offer and you happen not to get the grant, it's really not personal. It's not personal. And that's hard, because if you're an organization, you can't see all of the proposals that were submitted, right, in a single grant cycle. You just see that there was yours. And maybe it was funded, maybe it wasn't funded, but looking at that overall picture is something that we really try to address at the Selby Foundation, in addition to what are the systems that each organization is part of and what is their role in helping to make the community a better place. I also wish that nonprofits maybe understood a little bit more about why it's important for us to see the results of their work. What are the gains that they're making for people? We don't just want to hear about the activities, but we want to hear about the actual gains. And sometimes that's more difficult to talk about, but by having one-on-one conversations with people who work at foundations, that's a great way to help them in their cause. So it's those one-on-one conversations not to be afraid of. It helps us, it helps them, it helps everyone advance. And there's so many times, Andrew, when I have talked to an organization one-on-one, and I finally get it. I finally get something I was not able to understand on a piece of paper. I finally get something I wasn't able to understand just from their giving partner profile. So it's those one-on-one conversations. We want to have them.
Wow, so many threads to pull from there. I mean, things that I'm hearing are, one, is the value of relationship building and real one-on-one conversations. Because as you said, there's only so much you can get from a written report or something you read on a website. Coming together one-on-one, having a real conversation, that's a different story.
Yeah.
And I'm hearing that for a nonprofit, it's really important that they understand their role in a specific ecosystem, and they're able to articulate not just what they're doing, but what they're able to achieve.
That's right.
And the other piece is, and when I talk with other foundation leaders and executives, I hear this, is that the worst part of their job, or one of the hardest parts of their job, is saying no.
Yeah.
Because there's so many good things out there. Does that resonate with you?
Oh, absolutely. It is so hard to say no. That's one of my least favorite things to do. And I think because there's always, you hate for it to be personal in any sense, but there's always that little, if I just had this money, I would be able to do that. So one of the things we try to do at the Selby Foundation, and I think is really important part of establishing trust with nonprofits, is let me tell you about some other places you might be able to go to look for what you were looking for from the Selby Foundation if we were not able to provide it to you. Is there a door that I can open for you? Is there someone that I can introduce you to? Maybe if you don't know the right contact at a community foundation, how can I make that for you? If you need help with a fundraising plan, is there a way that we can connect you with someone to better understand what that plan might look like? If now wasn't the right time for you to come to us for help, let me help you lay out the steps to come in later. So I think that helps to establish trust. I also think it helps the organization understand we're really on their side. We want them to be successful. So our role is not just, do you get in, do you not get in, but how do we help you be successful? You know, people start organizations and run organizations because they want to see the community become a better place. And that's really part of our role as well. And conversely, what do we need to do as foundations? We need to be out in the community. We do not need to be sitting behind our desks making judgments about organizations based only on what we see in an application or in a giving partner profile or whatever. We need to get out. We need to meet people. We need to observe programs. We need to be part of the community because it's really hard out there. It's hard to do that work.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So reflecting back now in your current role to your time on the nonprofit side, is there anything else that you wish you could go back in time and say to yourself that, because you know it now, what do you wish you knew then?
Yeah. I mean, definitely going easy on yourself is one thing. I also think, I remember the first day that I stepped into a foundation office after working for a small nonprofit, where literally every staple seemed like it counted, and ordering supplies was a really big deal. I remember walking into the foundation and seeing, if you need anything, just open up this cabinet and here's where it is. If you need to order anything from your desk, just let us know what it is. I didn't come from a situation like that at the small organization. I also didn't come from an organization where there was a lot of money for professional development. And I think if I could go back right into that nonprofit space, I would say, what do we need to do to make room for professional development? That is one of the most important things that we can do. Learning new skills, making sure we're at the top of our game, but also making sure that we have the time and the space to interact with other people who have the similar roles. So all of the foundations in our region, we're very fortunate. They have all created different opportunities, not only for learning, but for coming together with our peers. And I think a couple things happen in those spaces. We learn how to become better at whatever it is we're doing, but we also learn that we're not alone. And I think that serving in nonprofit roles can be very isolating at times, right? Because the problems are so big. Our aspirations are so big about what we can accomplish, but sometimes it seems like the resources are so small. But when we do spend the time to be part of peer groups, talk with other people who are experiencing similar things, we learn that we can gain so much from each other, even just from sharing a little bit about our days. And I think building that social capital is really important. It helps to decrease the feeling of isolation that we can have in these roles, especially if you're someone leading an organization and you're kind of caught between the board and the staff. That's a big space, right? And I think a lot of people find that it's not the challenges of the job itself, technically speaking, but it's not always having that person to talk to. So I think going back to myself working for a nonprofit and saying, do I know the other program directors that are doing this type of work that are also doing the marketing, that are developing new things, that maybe you're also having to clean the self-composting toilets, right? That was part of what I did as well. And yes, there are other people doing that work and they do it because they're passionate, but sometimes you need to have those connections. So I think that's just so valuable, making the time for that, the space for that.
Yeah, and to your point earlier, that's about also understanding yourself within an ecosystem.
Absolutely, absolutely. And when you think about the cost of some of those things, between the local foundations, webinars, things that are available on a national basis virtually, there are so many free things out there. So your time is not free, but the dividends that come back if you just invest the time are huge.
So you talked about that first day coming into working for a foundation, and there's all these resources available, and now there's professional development dollars to access.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about what that transition was like going from nonprofit to funder?
Yeah, it really was amazing because I was no longer confined by, can we do this? Of course, there were parameters, but it was really, what can we not, instead of what can we do is what can we not do? I mean, I feel like it was so much more expanded for me. And so what that makes me realize all these years later is that I need to remember that first day, because sometimes I feel frustrated that someone hasn't turned in a report on time, just a really simple report, or given us an update or responded to an email. And then I remember, what are the pressures like of functioning in an environment where you have so many different things that are on you? Plus, you're also worried about, am I going to be able to pay for the staffing, right? Am I going to be able to come up? Am I going to have enough people that come out for this program that are going to pay for it, right? What do I need to be successful is a very different question in a role at a foundation versus a role at a nonprofit sometimes. So I need to make sure that I understand what that feels like. I'll also tell you that I think it is incredibly important for foundations to employ former nonprofit staff, because they are getting people on that team that have the empathy to understand what it's like to be in those shoes. Very excited. Last week, we had a new grants manager, Elizabeth Power, that started at the Selby Foundation, and she's come from 20 years of experience with local nonprofits. And so I know when she's on the phone with those organizations, when she's in a Zoom, when she's in a site visit, looking at their application, she's applying all the rigor that we need to apply when we're looking at those proposals, but she's also looking at it with empathy, understanding what it's like to have run a small organization where you're responsible for many, many things. Those demands are really challenging. So that's important to me, to come in with that level of empathy as well.
Yes, absolutely. And that's the big purpose of this podcast is to talk about the value of empathy in both directions. And unless you've been on the nonprofit side and you've experienced what it's like to write X number of grant applications and reports while also trying to make payroll and doing the important work you're doing, even if you read about it, it can be hard to really understand what that looks like and feels like on a daily basis.
Absolutely. And, she's going to be extremely helpful as well in revisiting the applications we have and what are we asking of people? because is everything that we are asking something that we use and something that we need? And if it's not, why? Why are we asking for it? So making sure that we are minimizing the amount of time that an organization has to spend so that we're collecting what we need to make the best decisions we can, right? Without overusing their time for something that's fruitless. So I think that's really important. It's also important, Andrew, I think that we take the time to talk to organizations before they take that step. So having those pre-meetings, making sure that we're as transparent as we can be about what it is that we're looking for so that the nonprofit is making a good decision as well. Is it a good use of my time to be working on this? And if not, are there any other resources they can refer me to?
Yeah, it sounds like you're working very intentionally to build into the culture, the structures, the practices of your organization, that experience you had working on the nonprofit side, and your employees, their experience on the nonprofit side, to really be transparent, to be open, to prioritize the relationship, to cultivate as much transparency as possible. Are there any other ways that you'd want to highlight that you're leveraging your prior nonprofit experience to impact how you're showing up as a funder?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think some of that answer lies in explaining the whys, which again goes back to transparency. So, just a small example of that. When I first started at the Selby Foundation, we have this rule that you can't reapply for funds until a year has passed after you've submitted your final report. So, of course, I first saw that and I thought, seems a little draconian. Why would we do that? But now I understand it is because of the tons of requests that we get. We are trying to be fair to everyone. And we're also trying to have the organizations think through. If you're applying to us for a big capital request, think through, is this the right time? Is this the right strategy for you? Are you going to have a larger need that's coming up quickly? And I like to be able to explain to them why we have that guideline, right? If we have a guideline that doesn't make sense, let's get rid of it. But if we do have one, let's be really transparent, because sometimes on the outside, it just seems that the foundations have made up all of these rules for no reason. So I think that's really important. Also going back, and if for some reason a proposal was denied or there's not a space in which we can help them, talking to them about what was some of the reasoning that went into that decision-making process. And again, sometimes it's simply we ran out of funds and we just had to make some strategy decisions. But sometimes there's a reason behind it. For example, organization reached out to us the other day. They wanted to come in and apply again after being denied a grant the last time. And we said, we really didn't understand the gains you were making. Talked a lot about the activities, but we still don't really understand, are you accomplishing what you say that you're accomplishing for this group of students? So why don't you come back in the fall? It's not going to take a lot of outcomes measurement work, but why don't you just do a couple of surveys or a couple of interventions mid-year, and that way you can report back about what your results really were, not how many students you have enrolled in the program, but whether or not those students stayed off of drugs. That's really what you're trying to accomplish. So let's find that out first. Raise a little bit of money toward this capital need you have, and maybe we can top it off for you.
What does your dream partnership look like between nonprofits and funders?
Yeah. So I think the dream partnership is just total and complete honesty. How I would love for nonprofits to feel the freedom to tell us what we're really not good at. Right? And I would love to be able to know that every single time I can talk to an organization and just say, look, here's what it was. So I do my best to do that and to do it with a lot of empathy behind it. But I know that the dream partnership is challenging because the nonprofits fear, if I told them what I really thought about this process, I might never get funding. So I'll tell you one of the ways that we have worked with the Patterson Foundation this year. We were very grateful to have a fellow, Alexa Carr, who worked with us, and she called a lot of the nonprofits we've worked with in the past and said, this is absolutely anonymous. Your name will not be shared with the Selby Foundation or with the Patterson Foundation. I want to know what worked well for you. I want to know what didn't work so well. And so that was able to give our organizations the opportunity to be honest with her. She came back, shared a great report with us that is giving us some ideas for what we can do differently in the future. I really appreciate that. Ideally, we would be able to get that feedback in real time. So just as we get back to an organization and let them know the outcome of what the grant decision was or whatever else we're working on with them, they would be able to tell us, here's what I liked about it or what I didn't like. or gee, I really wish that you had asked for more clarity on this, or I really wish that you had taken more time in the site visit to ask these questions. That would be so helpful because then we could learn how to be a better partner. But I understand that power dynamic is sometimes really hard. So we do ask for feedback, but I understand why we may not always get the total honest feedback they'd like to give us.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm hearing there's kind of two key pathways towards getting that feedback, right? There's surveys or listening experiences like what Alexa led. And there's also the way you show up in the one-on-one meetings and relationships with grant partners and nonprofits in the community. Are there other ways you'd want to highlight that you intentionally work to build trust and mitigate that power dynamic with nonprofits?
Yeah, one of the things we're doing now, they're very small, but we're using our marketing and communications consultant, Patricia Courtois, to host very small sessions on how to identify the psychographic profiles of donors, how to really tap into funding outside of the Selby Foundation, working with individuals. I usually sit in on those sessions, and as part of those sessions, I share stories about my experience working at a nonprofit before I was in the philanthropic space, what I encountered, some of the things that I see. I also use it as a chance to spotlight some of the things they're doing a really good job of. So we use every opportunity we can to complement the work of nonprofits and also let them know we appreciate them as individuals. I will sometimes check in with the leaders of our nonprofits and say, how you doing? I saw you at an event. It seems like you had a lot on your mind. Is everything okay? Do you feel appreciated in your role? And I think that's important because above and beyond what they do for their organizations, they are individuals with families. They have things going on in their lives we may not know about. It's really important for foundations, I think, to let our nonprofit leaders know we care about them as individuals. Yeah.
Amazing. So I kind of pull some threads together here as we close out our podcast. What I'm hearing from you is that the diverse experience from working for both the nonprofit and funder side has given you a more holistic perspective on how the sector operates. And the nonprofit background for you was really understanding, here's what it's like to do the work on the ground and the challenge of raising money and what it's like to get rejected and making payroll and doing the work from day to day, but also feeling that power dynamic with a funder and that fear of like, oh my gosh, are we going to get the money? Yeah. And then from the funder side, zooming out to an ecosystem level, having scarce resources that you can only give a certain amount, and having some, because of that and how many requests you get, some restrictions on both how many people you can say yes to and when you can accept certain kinds of questions, and then working through those power dynamics as well. Is there anything else? There's way more you talked about, but is there anything else you'd want to highlight about this dynamic or things you've learned working in different parts of the sector?
Yeah. So you're a great listener. You're a great listener, and I loved having this conversation with you. And I'm going to go back to one of the Selby Foundation values of humility. I think humility is really important on both sides of the fence, right? It's especially important from the funder side because we need to realize everything that organizations are dealing with. When they come to us, they're trying to look their best, and often they do look their best, but there's all kinds of things going on behind the scenes there. And so staying humble, understanding it's very difficult to do their jobs, especially in the climate that we're in now. And I think from the nonprofit side, maybe the humility comes in understanding how many different requests we get, how many different ways we are asked to contribute. And of course, that's our job as foundations and as investors, but we do have to make some decisions, right? And the decisions that we make do not necessarily reflect a lack on the part of organizations that we may not invest in today. It's just like you would hear with anything else, a no doesn't mean a no permanently. It means a no right now. It means a comeback later. And so I think having that degree of humility is really important. And also the humility to take the feedback when you get it. We want to get that feedback. We need to be humble enough to receive it and to be open to the feedback. And then when the organizations receive it from us, I think it is meant with the greatest intent, the intent of how can we help you become stronger for the next time.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Susie. Really appreciate you being here today for the work you do in our community and for your candid conversation, our candid conversation today about what it's like to operate in the sector. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. This was so much fun.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Listeners, thanks for joining us beyond the blog.